Thank you so much. So what I want to talk about today is creating a research poster. And so this is a really important thing because when you create a research poster, there's a very kind of formulaic way that research posters are created. And I want to talk to you about kind of what the expectations are going to be from your judges and people who are coming to the presentation, what they are used to and what they've seen in research posters, so that you know the best way to present your research, so that how you present it does not distract from the message of what you're presenting. And so that's really what I want to focus on. So I'm going to uh, begin by talking about kind of the typical elements of a research poster, just going section by section, and some thoughts, broad level thoughts to consider when you're creating that. And then I want to move into best practices. So overall best practices to effectively prepare and present your research poster. Because again, there are expectations that judges and session attendees will have, when they come to look at a research poster. And so I want to make sure those are things that folks are familiar and comfortable with. Um, so what is a research poster? Let's go ahead and jump into the sections. So I have this very basic diagram, and I'm going to go section by section and talk a little bit about what goes into each section and kind of some things to think about to make sure you're presenting your information as effectively as possible. And again, I want to say that there are differences in how people present things, but I'm going to talk about kind of in a large sense how these things are typically designed. So the top section I've highlighted in orange here: titles, authors, institutions. As the name implies, that's what it is. It's the titles. Beneath that is the list of authors, and beneath that is the list of institutions that are represented by those authors. So the title will be in usually a largest font. And then the authors will be listed in a particular order. And in terms of what the order should be, there may be group by group or discipline by discipline differences. So you may want to talk to somebody, a PI or somebody more senior in your group about what the expectations are. My experience has been that it's typically the person who did the most work on the project would be the first author listed. And then the authors are listed in descending order by the amount of contribution or the degree of contribution they made to the project, with the final author often being the PI or the corresponding author, the person who is in charge of the project. But again, there may be lab by lab or group by group or discipline by discipline differences in that. So it's good to kind of talk that over and make sure you're understanding what the expectations and common practices are. And then underneath that would be list of institutions represented, departments and institutions represented by the people in that those corresponding authors. So pretty straightforward there. The next part in kind of the upper left, and these get read top left, top to bottom, left to right. So the top left is the first part of it. And this is the introduction or background. So there's a number of things that you're trying to accomplish in this section. One is giving a background or a framing of the topic, giving a larger context. So you're trying to share with your audience why they should care about this topic. And giving the background information that's required to properly orient your audience to the topic. So you don't want to just jump right into your research you may want to give some background information to orient your audience to the research before moving into your specific question. And the degree of framing required or the degree of orientation required is really going to depend on who your audience is. So if you were at, a conference that had a very specific population of, like, let's say, neuroscientists, uh, maybe I don't have to define what PTSD is or something. Maybe I can assume that the people in my audience, the people who are seeing my poster, will know what that means. And so I don't have to give a definition. Or if it was a conference of endocrinologists, maybe I don't have to describe what diabetes is, if my research is about diabetes. However, if I'm giving this presentation to a broader audience, maybe I do have to give that because I can't assume that everybody who comes to my poster will know what these things are. So this is where you have to visualize and anticipate who your audience is going to be, and then let that inform the amount of framing that is required to give a proper context for your project. Another thing is doing a literature review. So what do we know already from the literature? What are the gaps? So this, again, is where you're bringing your audience up to speed about what the literature tells us. What is it, what is it that's already been studied on this topic? And this is to kind of orient them so they are, so that you can then move into your purpose. What is your project? Why is it important? Including your hypothesis. And so I have this image of a funnel here because that's how I imagine this section. You are funneling your audience towards your hypothesis. You are starting broad with a framing and an orientation to the topic at large, and then moving through a review of the literature to a more specific problem or issue, and then eventually down to what is your project and how is it you are going to address some gap in the literature. So that's how I think about this. Again, it's really think about your audience and what is it they are going to need to orient them and get them ready for what comes next. So that's kind of how I would think about that. The next section is going to be methods. This is going to be your research design. So you are going to describe the subjects that were involved, the techniques, the settings, materials, reagents, like whatever is appropriate to your research. You ended the prior section with a hypothesis. You are now going to move to this section, the methods, and you are going to describe how you intend to address that hypothesis or test that hypothesis. What are the techniques that you're going to use to test the hypothesis? And you'll hear me say this again. These sections should all flow into one another. As one section ends, it should naturally flow into the next section. So the prior section ends with a research question or hypothesis. Then you flow into this section, which is how am I going to answer that hypothesis or question? So that is what this section is. The first section, I should have said background introduction, is typically written in paragraph form, like full sentences. This section might be more bullet pointy, so maybe not full sentences. This is someplace where you want to provide adequate detail, but it may not necessarily have to be full paragraphs, full sentences to accomplish that. You may be able to get away with just more abbreviated phrases, but you want to, again, give enough detail to explain to someone who is looking at your poster what they need to know. Next, results. This is going to be what happened. This is just going to be what did you observe? This is not an analysis. This is not what does it mean? Did it answer my hypothesis? Did it not answer my hypothesis? This section is just results. What did you observe? This can be done with words through, a bullet point summary of the results, but also ideally, this is a place where you could introduce graphs and graphically present the results. But again, the important thing in the results section is it's just the facts. It's just what did you observe? This is not the place for any analysis or discussion of the meaning of it. And again, this can be some combination of graphs, which I would highly recommend because it gives more visual interest to the poster, and it can also involve just a written description of the results. The next part below that, this is where we're going to get into the analysis. This is the conclusions. So this is where I take the data that I've discussed and I say, what does it mean? Did it answer my hypothesis? What were the most important points that I want my readers to take away? What does it mean? What are the future directions as well? That's another thing to really think about, and something that I highly recommend people consider, because when you're presenting a poster with research results, you are in a way entering a conversation that's already going on. I mean, people have been doing research on your topic of interest, and you are sort of entering that conversation. But the conversation is going to continue after you finish. So what are the next directions? And I think it's good to think about that, because that is a very common question that people will ask you at a poster presentation. It's okay, what's next? If you could design the next experiment, what would it be? Or what's next in this project? So think about future directions and maybe even include a section. Some people actually include that as a separate section from the conclusions. But definitely think about that. What's the next directions? So anyway, this section is conclusions, and this is where the analysis of the data occurs. Next is citations. So, I should say that for the takeaway points, this is typically could be done in bullet points, but is often done as full paragraphs, full sentences. Citations. So as I mentioned in your background introduction, there should be some element of literature review to show that you have taken the steps to, you have informed yourself as to what came before you, and so that you are properly situating your work within this larger stream of information that's been going on. And so this is a place for the citations to put that in. And I think that's really important. I've seen people's posters where they don't have citations in the background, and it always strikes me, because I wonder, where did you get that information from? I want you to tell me where that came from. Part of it is just being upfront, and the reason why we do citations, to give people credit where credit's due, but it's also to show your audience that you did your due diligence. Like, you looked at the information that came before you, and you understand the topic, and you understand what information has come before you, what work has been done before you, and you understand that, and that you are situating your work within that larger context. And so that's where citations are very important, just to show that you've done that work. And finally, in the lowest right section might be acknowledgments. So this is where you might thank those who have helped you in your project. So people whose contribution to the project may not rise to the level of co-authorship. So if they are co-authors, they should be listed at the top, right? Of course, with all the authors' titles, or the title authors and institutions. But there may be people who assisted along the way, whose contribution, again, does not reach that level of co-authorship, but you still may want to acknowledge their help. People who provided you with a key reagent, or who shared a survey with you that you modified, or something like that. And this is also a place to mention any funding that you received, to put that in the bottom right here. So those are kind of the key things here. A few overall points that I want to make, and I think I make those on here. The following slide, which is session attendees are going to and judges are going to come with expectations, and so it's important for you to understand what those expectations are, and that's kind of largely what I've been talking about. And that's why this is an important thing to know about. Another thing is that continuity is important. One section should flow naturally into another. And a sub point on that is the methods and results. And this is something I neglected to mention. And actually, I'll just go back. When you go from methods to results, there should be a one-to-one correlation, meaning if you describe a technique or uh, a protocol or some methodology in your method section, there should be corresponding data for that in your results, and vice versa. If you present information in your results that are, the outcome of a particular methodology, that methodology should be explained in your methods section. There should be a one-to-one correlation. So there should not be information that shows up in your results that you did not explain how you got that information in your methods, and you should not describe things in your methods unless it leads to results. So again, that's part of this larger idea of continuity from one section to another. The idea is that someone could look at your poster even without you being there, and they could piece together what you did. And so you really want to think about that. And then future directions. I'm going to come back to that point. So the thing I always say is, you're part of a larger conversation now. Think about what comes after you. Again, because people are likely to ask you that question, but also because it's just an important thing to think about. Like, your research is not the end of the story. What's next? What's next for you, or what do you propose would be the natural follow-up to what you are presenting? So think about that and even share that on the poster. So that's what I want to say in terms of research poster layout. So let me change gears here and move towards best practices. So in the preceding, I've talked about kind of the specific elements to include in a poster. Now I want to talk about overarching best practices. And the first of those is find the guidelines. Understand what is expected of you for a particular event. If it's a conference or if it's research showcase at GW, understand what it is that your program or whoever is sponsoring the event or whoever is administering the event, what are their expectations? Because it changes from event to event. And an example of this is like poster size. A very typical size is 3 feet by 4 feet. It's 36 by 48. But you may go to an event where they don't have the space for that, so it's 2 feet by 3 feet. And so I've had this experience myself where I've gone to an event, I read the guidelines, and I knew that that they required a smaller size, but the person next to me did not read the guidelines, and they just recycled a poster that they used from another event, but their poster was way too big. So like they had to kind of fold over half of it, which really diminished the effectiveness of what they were trying to accomplish. So read the guidelines, understand what is expected in terms of fonts, word number or word counts, poster size, whatever the rules are, because the rules will change from event to event. So oftentimes you can recycle posters and use them at multiple events, but sometimes you can't. So understand what's expected. I think it's just a good general practice. Best practice number 2 is not to overwhelm with text. And that's kind of gets back to what I was saying. There are certain sections where you can get away with not writing full sentences, maybe just bullet points and phrases, or maybe having a graph instead of verbally describing the results. And you don't want to fill every bit of blank space with with text. You want there to be blank space on your poster because that if there are too many words, that is overwhelming for people. And I have had the experience of going to events and I just see like a wall of words on a poster, and I don't even know if I want to engage with it because I don't, this is too much. Um, you're not sharing everything you know about the poster. Again, you're trying to take people through a coherent story with your poster, but you're not going to share every single thing you did necessarily on the poster. So this is not a place to, regurgitate all the information possible. This is a place to be selective and to think about what excuse me, um, what it is you need to share in a way that is not going to be overwhelming, but is going to be comprehensive. And oh, thank you for I see Timmy put in the note. The approved size for the School of Public Health poster is 42 by 42. So be sure to be mindful of that. Um, the flip side of that for best practice number 3 is not to distract with visuals. And what I mean by this is visuals should have purpose. So if you have a visual element on your poster, and you should, to make it again more inviting to conference attendees, make sure that it is not distracting. So some of the ways that this shows up is like color combinations. So make sure you have maximal contrast in your colors, because if it's hard to read, there are people who may have not the same visual abilities as everyone else. And so they may have trouble reading it if there's this poor contrast in terms of the color selection. So make sure you have maximal contrast. And make sure visuals have a purpose, because people's eyes are going to be drawn to them and they are mentally going to be trying to fit it all together into a coherent story. And so if there's something there that doesn't really apply or isn't really relevant to the overall story, that's a distraction. Um, so just be mindful of that as well. All right, let me go. Using templates. So I see that there was a template shared in the chat. So thank you for doing that. So for a lot of these things, templates exist. So just use those templates. That's a great starting point for that. They will be sized appropriately to begin with. So if a template is provided, by all means use that. If no template is provided, there are ways of using PowerPoint just to create your own template. I'll maybe show that quickly. So if a template is provided, absolutely use it. And I see a template was shared in the chat for the School of Public Health. So by all means use that. But I will point out one of the ways that if no template is provided, you can actually create a poster using PowerPoint. And the way you do that is I open up a blank slide. And if I go to design and slide size and then custom slide size, I can create the size that I need. So if it's, let's say, in this case, School of Public Health 42 by 40, but let's say if it was something else, I can write that in here. And then maximize. And now if this were to be printed out, it would print out 36 by 48. So this is one of the ways that people do that. So I just want to put that out there. But I do want to reiterate that if a template is provided, absolutely just use that. Sorry, let me get resituated here. The next best practice I want to talk about is what I call non-expert advice. And what I mean by that is if you are working in a team of people and you're all working on a particular project, there's a set of shared assumptions that you will have and that will develop shared acronyms, shared language, shared assumptions, shared knowledge that you have. But you're not presenting your poster to those people. You're presenting to some wider audience. And this is where I think it can be very helpful to ask someone who is not on your team, not in your group, and maybe not even in your subject area to look at your poster and say, does this make sense? Is there any language I've used, any words I need to define, any acronyms that I need to spell out, anything here that is not clear, is not understandable? Because it's very easy to get that tunnel vision of I'm talking to people, working on this project, and I'm working with a faculty member, and I'm working with other students, and we all have this deep shared understanding of the topic, and we all speak a certain language to each other. You don't want to reflect that in the poster because the people who are looking at it may not understand that stuff. So I think one of the ways to avoid that problem is to talk to a friend or a classmate who does not do a similar project or is not working in a similar area to you. Hey, can you take a look at this? Just read it over. Does this make sense? Is there anything here that I need to explain further? That can help you to avoid misunderstandings as you move along. And again, this all gets back to who is my audience? Who is going to be reading this? Is it going to be people with subject expertise? Is it going to be a broader, multidisciplinary group of folks from different departments? Something more like or different areas like Research Showcase, where they're not all going to be people who are intimately knowledgeable about my area. Another best practice is it's sort of two sides of the same coin. One is to have your elevator speech ready. So by elevator speech, for people who aren't familiar with that saying, is, imagine yourself getting on an elevator with someone and you're going to the fifth floor and they're going to the third floor and they ask you a question. You have until the third floor to answer the question because they're getting off. So you have to have this succinct speech ready to succinctly describe and answer the question. So when someone walks up to you and says, tell me about your poster, they don't want you to read every single word on the poster. They want your elevator speech. They do not want you to just sit there and go section by section and just read the words to them, because they could do that themselves, of course. What they want from you is like the 2-minute version of this, where you bring them through the poster, hitting the highlights in a succinct way. So that's your elevator speech. And this is something to practice beforehand. So stand in front of a mirror, whatever it is you have to do, and imagine someone has just asked you, hey, walk me through your poster. Tell me what this is about. What are you going to say to them? Have it worked out ahead of time, and make sure it's succinct, hit the highlights, but don't say everything, because they're going to ask questions afterwards. They may just walk away afterwards, thank you, and walk away, but there's a good chance that they're going to say, oh, well, tell me more about this. And so that gets to the next rule, which is make sure you can explain everything on your poster. You're not going to say everything on your poster, but make sure you could explain everything on your poster if asked, because people are going to ask you follow-up questions. And where I've seen students get in trouble with this is if they make a poster and they're part of a research group and there's some image or graph or something that they borrow from a more senior student's poster. They say, oh, you have this great image. Let me just cut and paste that. It looks really great. I want to put that on my poster. Be sure you can explain it. Anyway, because if somebody says, oh, tell me about this image right here. What methodology did you use to get this? Or what do all these things represent on this graph? Make sure you can explain every single part of your poster. You don't want to have any part of it that you just borrowed from someone else that you only half understand, because if somebody asks you, and you have to say, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't really know what that means. That doesn't look good. That you have something on your poster that you are unable to explain. So it's two sides of the same coin. One is have a succinct version, but be able to explain everything if asked, because that's the typical way these work. Someone walks up to you, tell me about your poster. You give them the elevator speech, and then one of two things happens. They say thank you and they walk away, or they say, oh, that's very interesting. Tell me more about this. And they may pick any element of your poster to try to drill down on. So you have to be prepared for that. So this is all stuff to work out ahead of time, you know. And again, things to practice before the actual session, both the elevator speech and go over every element of the poster and make sure you can explain it. Um, Another best practice that I know a lot of people kind of subscribe to is the idea of that the title reflecting the conclusions. So that the title kind of gives the answer. And one of the reasons for that is in a lot of settings, um, the organizers of the event will create a booklet of abstracts with the titles and abstracts, and there may be hundreds of posters presented. If it's some large national conference, and the attendees are not going to go to every single poster. They're going to go through the abstract book, either online or like a physical abstract book, and go page by page and circle the ones they want to see. And so if you have a title that's confusing or doesn't really convey accurately what your research was about, it kind of throws people off. But if your title reflects the conclusion, someone can read that and say, okay, I want to learn more about that. Here's my example, my made up example. Drug X lowers A1C levels among elderly individuals with type 2 diabetes. If I'm interested in type 2 diabetes among elderly individuals, like I'm drawn to this because I know what it's about. So that's kind of a best practice, the title reflecting very directly what the conclusions of the poster were. So I put the slide here, but I know we're going to hear from Drew and Ben in a moment, so I'll give them a chance to add to this. But let me just give a summary, and then I will stop, open up for questions, and open it up for Drew and Ben. So my summary of best practices: read the guidelines, understand what's expected, because it's not always the same event to event. Having a balanced use of images and text with a healthy amount of blank space, because you don't want your poster to be overwhelming, just visually overwhelming, because that doesn't really attract people to come and look at it. You want the poster to be able to stand on its own. So it has to tell a kind of a clear, coherent story. But it can't be everything you know about the topic. It has to be a kind of a linear, coherent story. Take steps to ensure clarity, avoid confusing jargon. And again, this is where seeking advice from people outside of your area can help, and be prepared. And again, this is getting back to have that elevator speech ready. Like, what is the 2-minute or 3-minute version of your story that if somebody comes to you, because this is what will happen, they will say, tell me about your poster. They want the elevator speech version of it. They don't want you to read every single word to them. But also be prepared for follow-up questions where they pick any part of the poster and say, tell me more about this. So be prepared to describe any and everything on your poster. So I'm going to stop there, ask if there are questions, but also I want to turn things over to my LAI colleagues to share what they have to share.
Hello, I have a question. I see the chat is disabled. So my question is the size. If is it horizontal or vertical, kind of the portrait or the other format? Is that prescribed or only the sizes in terms of length and width?
So I think if I'm understanding, and Timmy, please jump in. I believe the size that's requested for this is 42 by 42 inches. So that is the length and width dimensions for this. Anything else to say about that? Uh,
So that's absolutely correct. So the length and breadth or the length and width for the posters are 42 by 42. That's the maximum size actually. You could do anything less than that, but it cannot be more than 42 by 42. And I think Drew, before we go into the Q&A, I know there are quite a number of questions people do have. Drew, do you want to speak more from your end? Because I'm guessing most of these questions will come from, you know, from your end, just to limit the number of questions we get given the time frame we have. So let's have you just say one or two things, then we'll go into the Q&A as soon as possible.
Sure. Yeah, I will. I'll share our website really quickly so people know where to go to submit a print for us. I'll share that real quick and then yeah, hand it over to everyone to ask their questions. So I'm gonna share that screen real quick. Here we go. Okay. So this is our website. If everyone is able to see it, it looks like they can. Great. So if you go to our website, which I will put the link in the chat right here. That's going to be, we have a Go link, which is go.gwu.edu/create. And we are also on the library website. So that's also just library.gwu.edu/create. Either will take you to this webpage. You're going to see all of our services listed here. The one in particular that you're going to be focusing on for this project is going to be this box that says 3D and research poster printing. If you click on that, it'll take you to our webpage here. And there's going to be this blue button that says research poster printing request form. This is going to be the form that you use to submit your poster to us for printing. Please read all of the details on it. You'll proceed through it. It'll ask you for things like what's the name of your project. You'll need to upload your project. What's really important for you to remember, and this form will remind you, is that our printer only accepts files in the JPEG format. We got a new printer 1 to 2 years ago, and it can only accept JPEG files. So with that in mind, we have resources for you if you're curious on how to make sure that you are formatting your poster correctly to make sure that it's fitting within that requirement. If we scroll down on our printing page here, we have creating and preparing research posters for printing. You all have your own template you're working with, so you probably don't want to work with ours, but we do have, for future reference, we have a template we've made that is available in Canva. So if you're a Canva user, you can copy our template and use it just like that. But what's important for this is if you click Learn how to prepare your files for large format printing, it will take you to this web page, and we have web pages for Canva, Adobe Express, PowerPoint for both Windows and Mac, as well as Google Slides. And those are going to be step-by-step instructions on how to make sure that you are exporting properly and you're going to be able to get the best quality image to us so that we can print it for you. And that's going to be the image you provide to us on this form. We're going to also ask you what are your dimensions you need. If you're going to be doing this, you'll be hitting 42 by 42, and then how many copies. And then the next page will just ask you information about who you are and all of that so we can track who's using our services. But we try to give you as many resources as possible. That way you can make sure that your poster looks great and we don't have to email you to say, hey, this is blurry, it's not going to come out right, please submit it again. We want to try to make that process easier for you and us because we get hundreds to thousands of prints in April alone. So it's a busy time for us. So we want to make this as smooth as possible. So please feel free to take advantage of those resources. I will stop sharing my screen.